it over to my very dear friend, Marge Sponcil.
Okay, thanks. I've just brought along some miscellaneous stuff today and thought I would talk for a little bit about a couple of things in sewing. Basically, few inventions have changed the world as much as the invention of the sewing machine, both in the industrial world as well as the home market. And the sewing machine basically was invented during the first industrial revolution. And basically it was to decrease the amount of manual labor that was required to make garments. And before this time, garments were made by hand stitching, so they would take weeks to do. People had very few clothes, and they didn't launder them very often because they were afraid they'd have to repair them. So anyway, the sewing machine basically came into being around in the 1700s, particularly in Europe. And several men were working on the project and coming up with their ideas and so on. And they really weren't designing them for home use. They were designing them for industry to have ready-to-wear garments. And basically, the first creations came from Europe, but they were very basic. They had one thread source. They were operated most of the time by a hand flywheel. They did cut down the labor involved in the sewing, but they still weren't real practical. Basically, these machines had a blunt needle or an awl that would punch through the fabric. It would grab the thread on the bottom and make essentially what's a chain stitch because it was only one thread source. Sometimes the chain stitch is called a crochet stitch, and I basically just crocheted a piece here, but one of the problems with a chain stitch is that if the thread breaks at any one point or comes loose, the whole thing just ravels out. So when the garments were made with a chain stitch, there was always all kinds of repair going on with them because, you know, of the way they were. Chain stitch machines are still used, some today, for some of the garments. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a guy bring me a pair of trousers that he needed the hem put back in because it was a chain stitch. It had caught and it ripped out the whole thing. So I just, you know, had to put it back together again. So it still is used, and you will find it on some ready-to-wear things, but it's not as practical and as long-living as the more modern kinds of machines. Over the years, different people made different changes on the and improvements to the basic sewing machine idea, the basic design that they were using. And the significant name in America is Elias Howe, who is the inventor attributed to making the modern sewing machine. In the mid-1800s, he had worked on making a machine, but it was the mid-1800s that he got a patent for his machine. And the big improvement was that the thread came from two sources. It came from a top thread, and then there was a bottom thread, which we call a bobbin now, that allowed the machine, when it operated, to interlock those two threads, and it makes a much more sturdy stitch, and that's still the premise of sewing machines today. We have a top thread, a bottom thread, they interlock in the base of the machine, and then the stitch is made. So that was a great improvement. However, Howe had a hard time selling his ideas and his patent. He went back to Europe and tried to make a go of it there. Some people listened, some didn't. But he died at the age of 48, and so he didn't really have a long time to get this going and had gotten discouraged with his patent. But after his death, his family came back to the States and tried to get the business reorganized and going again. And they did it for a while, but eventually his ideas and his patented sewing machine machines were sold to, let me think his first name, Isaac Singer. Okay, so Singer is a name now that we know, and it was the Singer industry that kind of built that empire based on that notion. The invention of the sewing machine opened up all kinds of industries for ready to wear, so people were able to have more clothes. They were able to launder them more because they weren't falling apart. And from the very earliest times, the older singers Singer machines that incorporated all of these ideas from 75 years before, basically they were patented by Singer. They were durable. They were wonderful to open up the whole industry. And so eventually Singer started marketing the machines for home use as well as for the industry. And the first machines they had were high quality. They were had reliable parts, and still that Singer name in this day and age, lives. Sometimes I think Singer has lived beyond their abilities, but they're still wonderful machines out there. The first machines, the ones in Europe, were operated by a hand wheel. This little toy sewing machine that I have over here has a hand wheel, and of course it didn't come from Europe, but this is the kind of thing that would have been powered by hand as it stitched. Then the next thing that was developed was the treadle machine, and that had a foot pedal that the operator moved their foot up and down to operate the machine. I actually learned to sew on a treadle machine.
So did I.
Because when I started 4-H when I was 9 years old, that's the machine we had. So for at least a couple of years, I know that's what I sewed on. I brought this along. This is a little outfit that my mother made me when I was 5. So I know that this was made on a treadle sewing machine because that's all she had at that point. So anyway, the one thing that I think is interesting is, and sewing machines have come a long way, but the early machines, they sewed forward, sometimes back, but they didn't do fancy things like buttonholes. So if you look at these buttonholes, my mom had actually hand-stitched these buttonholes in this little coat for me. So I'm 80, so this little coat is 75 years old. But it was done on a treadle machine. One of the popular machines now that's highly coveted is the Singer Featherweight. And it's a durable Singer machine. That's the black one that I brought here. They started to be manufactured for home use in about 1933. And they were made up through probably 68, 70, something like that, in this form. These machines now are coveted. They're sought after, particularly by quilters. The machine only sews forward and back. This particular one is a model 221, and I can't find the exact date of it, but I'm saying it's probably manufactured in anywhere from the 30s to the mid-40s, something like that. If you were to go on eBay now and try to buy one, you would be paying, or they would be asking, anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for a Singer Featherweight. I'll just tell you a little story about how I got this. As I've done alterations for 50 years, the very first customer that I had, she didn't drive, so I had to go to her apartment to fit her and take her stuff and whatever. And so she asked me one day if she said, I have a sewing machine, but I think it needs work. And I said, well, I'll look at it, see if it needs cleaned and oiled. So one day I took my stuff over there, and this was the machine that she had. And this is before I knew about the high value of featherweights. But I oiled it, cleaned it, got it sewing good, and so I must have said something to her. She was an elderly lady, but I must have said something to her about, if you ever want to sell this machine, let me know. So I don't know exactly what happened to her, whether she went into a nursing facility or whatever, but I hadn't heard from her in a little while. And one day I got a call from someone, and she told me she was this lady's daughter. And the lady had passed away, but she said there was a note with the machine that I might be interested in it. And I said, yeah, I might be, so how much do you want for it? Well, she wanted $25. So I bought this one for $25, probably almost 50 years ago now. But when I began to look into it a little bit, these machines are very valuable now, and people look for them. I went to a quilting retreat a few years ago, and there probably were 30 people there, and I bet 12 to 15 of them had a Singer Featherweight that they were sewing their quilts together with. So I thought that was interesting. They're lightweight. They weigh about 11 pounds. They're durable. I haven't probably used this one in 20 years, but I got it out yesterday, and the stitching that's on that little pink fabric under there is, I just plugged it in and threaded it up, and it sews wonderful. So they're reliable, they're functional, even though this machine, has lots of years on it. Today, the sewing machines are of three types. They are either mechanical, which they're either hand crank or treadle. They are electric, and sometimes, I think in some parts of the world, I've not really seen one, but they have some that are battery powered. And then the most complicated are the computerized machines, and I don't have any of those. What I have works fine, and I'm not interested in getting into all the electronic stuff. As we look at machines, they have come a long ways. Even the mechanical machines or the Certainly the electric ones have all kinds of things built in. Buttonholes, fancy stitches, zigzag, all kinds of stuff that folks can do with those machines now. And the computerized are even more advanced than that. They can do pictures, do writing, embroidery, all that kind of stuff. One other story that I'll tell you about, a few years ago I got acquainted with a pastor and her husband, and he was a pastor also, and talked with this lady for a little bit, but she and he went to Liberia once a year he worked with the farm program, and they were in this village where they were trying to get these people a little more self-sufficient. So he would go there, and his mission was that he would try to help them with farming and give them some stuff they needed. I'd always had an interest in doing mission work, but I can't go and build houses and stuff, so I was intrigued that this lady had a mission for sewing, and she was trying to get the people in this village to do cottage industries so they could have some products they could sell and make a little bit of money. And at first I thought about trying to go on the trip with them, but in the end I got scared and didn't go, because it was really in a remote part of Liberia. But I did that year gather up some supplies. She had a list of things they needed, fabric and thread, and I don't even remember what all, but I know I took her a garbage bag full of stuff to share with the ladies in Liberia. And afterwards, she told me that they had donations, and they were able to ship 2 treadle machines over there for her mission trip that year, which was wonderful because, of course, the village didn't have electric, so they needed treadle. But in some parts of the world, treadle machines are still the way to go and, the thing to do. One other thing that I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about, because as sewing machines became more popular in the home, there was certainly ready-to-wear, but women were trying to make things for their family as well. Things like aprons and toys and pajamas and quilts and clothes, of course. But fabric was scarce, and so they had to be resourceful to what they had. It was during the Depression when this era kind of came along, but there were sacks of grain and things like flour and sugar that were sold in basically burlap bags, but they had enough sense to start making them out of cloth bags. And so the women this is like the first recycling kind of thing that was going on, but they would take the bags after the grain and stuff had gotten out of them and tear the bags apart and use the fabric for whatever, clothes or whatever for their kids. The first bags that came out in the Depression, they often had the logo of the company on there, and so whatever they made out of them was going to still have that, notion on there. And basically, as the manufacturers of those bags realized that they were being recycled, they got a patent for a dye that actually would be removed, would fade away when the fabric was washed. And so what was left then was fabric that was a little more usable. And then finally they got to just printing the fabric that they put the grains and stuff in, and putting a paper label on it so that people didn't have to worry about washing out the labels and stuff. So it was called feed sack fabric. And I can remember my grandmother talking about that, and she had aprons, full aprons. She used to wear a full apron all the time that she had made out of this feed sack material. And this apron is made of feed sack material that I got from her, probably. And you see that it's very colorful now. So this one would have come with a paper label on it, but the fabric mostly was cotton, and so it was very durable and could be used. One flour sack or one feed sack, if they were to tear it apart, it would make about a yard of fabric, which was enough to make a child's garment or a toy or whatever. It would take probably 3 flour sacks to make an adult garment, but they were resourceful, and so I think that that's always kind of a special thing. I had this in my chest at home. I haven't really ever used it, but it is of feed sack material, probably from the Depression time. I also brought along a variety of notions and stuff that I have collected. This is how all this started, because one day I said to Tina that I had this suitcase that had all this stuff. She's like, oh, come and bring it. So there's just a couple things in here that I think are interesting, but I did bring a button box, and buttons can be made of any material: wood, glass, metal, whatever. And the old buttons, you know, are collectors. There are people who really just love collecting those. One of the things that I didn't remember that I had that was in this suitcase is an old pattern. Let me see here if I can see. The price of this pattern says 45 cents. And this particular pattern, if you were to buy a pattern today, you'd pay probably $17 to $22 for a pattern. But this particular pattern is one that it's before the printed patterns. If you buy a pattern now, it's all printed with lines where you cut out and where you sew. And this is just a pattern, but it has nothing printed on it. There's little holes in it, there's notches to help you figure out how to put it together, but this is a forerunner to the printed patterns that we have today. So I'm not sure how old this is, but it's got some age on it, I think. I also brought along another pattern. This one actually says a printed pattern. So the pieces in this will have the instructions, will have the cutting lines, the sew lines, and that sort of thing. So it's a little bit advanced from what women were having to do with the non-printed ones. Some of the notions, and I have a variety of things here. Most of them say, you know, 10 cents, 8 cents, something like that. Where now if you were to buy a package of rickrack, you'd probably be paying $2 to $3 for it. I don't know, I haven't bought any in a while. But it is big. These are needle books. And I brought this one along because one of the things that I remember as a kid learning to sew was that companies would give needles away. This one was from AAA. But but this one I think is from, I forget what company this is, Kellogg's. So they were promotional things, but they gave them away to people who wanted to sew with them. So, you know, that's kind of a interesting thing, I think. I have a couple of darners, these wooden pieces right here, because you know, money was scarce and people would put their socks over these darners and actually repair them and sew them without having to, you know, get pricks in their fingers and so on. One other thing that I brought along, and I've given one of these here to the Historical Society, but this little magazine I remember as a kid, it's called Work Basket, and you could subscribe to it. This one says 15 cents. I don't even know if they make it anymore, but every month this would come and there would be patterns and instructions in here that women could use to make things for their house or gifts or whatever. So these have some age on them too. This one says 51. That's when that one came out. Another thing that I had a couple pieces of that I brought along to show. This is a technique called tatting. I don't know how to tat, but there's a special needle for it. But women would make lace, if you will, and use it to decorate pillowcases or scarves or clothes or whatever.
Handkerchiefs.
Huh?
Handkerchiefs.
Or handkerchiefs, yep. But those are two pieces of tatting that I have. In this box, well, basically now most of the machines have round bobbins that hold the bottom thread. Here's some pieces that are all tangled up. But these are bobbins from an original machine where the bobbin went into the shuttle, which fit into the bottom of the machine, and this held the bobbin thread. So again, those are old. Here's the shuttle that this would have gone into. So basically it held the machine, or it held the bottom thread so that the interlock stitch could be made. Other than that, there's just some miscellaneous stuff here, buckles and whatnot, some cards of buttons. Most of those buttons will say 15 cents, 29 cents for a card of buttons. You would pay now probably $4 to $5 for a card of buttons if you have to go and replace them. You know, the premise of the sewing machine is still the same today. You know, I mean, I've sewed long enough that I could take any machine and figure out how to thread it, because the sequence of where it goes in every machine is the same. And so once you get it threaded correctly and you figure out the features of the machine, you should be able to carry through with it. But as a basic standard machine, it's going to be the same today as it was, you know, back when the featherweights were good. That featherweight, I probably haven't sewn on it in 20 years, and I took it out of the case, dusted it off a little bit last night, put the thread on, and it sews perfect. So they're worth having, keeping up with.
Do you remember your first experience with sewing? Remember what the first type of sewing you were working with?
Well, my mom sewed, so I think she had me making some doll clothes even before I started 4-H, but I started 4-H when I was 10, 9 or 10, and like I said, I remember the treadle machine that you had to pump up and down with your foot. And I don't remember exactly when she got an electric one. I'll just tell you this little story too. When I was teaching grads, where I went from school to school to work with the students who had children while they were in school, I would have them make, at Christmas time, I would take a sewing machine and have them make a little gift of some sort for their child. Oftentimes it was a Christmas stocking. And so I was carrying around the Singer Featherweight because it was lightweight. And, you know, they never sewed on it when I wasn't right there with them. But I did that for 2 or 3 years, and then I thought, when I was realizing the value of it, I thought, you know, I better be careful using this machine. And I had tried to buy, the brand that I sew on is called Elna. And they have a little machine they called a Elna Lotus. And I had tried to buy one on eBay, I bet for 2 or 3 years. Sight unseen, but I trusted Elna, and I had bid up to $350 on one, trying to get it, because I thought I'll take that then to the schools. Never could get it bought, because at the last minute somebody'd come in and overbid me. So one time I was up to McCormick's sewing up on Route 7, and I asked him, and he carried Elnas at that point, and I said, do you ever get any Elna Lotus? And, well, no. You know, people that have those usually keep them. And so I told him the story about how I'd tried to buy one, and because I wanted to take it around to the schools. And he said, well, we have a modern Singer Featherweight. So he took me over and showed me this machine. And it was $250. But it, you know, it didn't look like this. It looks like a modern machine. It does zigzag forward and back and whatever. But I ended up buying that from him because that's what I ended up taking around to the schools then, rather than this featherweight. But it's still called a Singer Featherweight, but it's the modern version of it. You're welcome to come look at any of this stuff.
Thank you.